against us. Lead us not to temptation. Deliver us from the wicked one. Power and
All right, we back. Shabbat Shalom. All praises to the Most High. Yah, Yehoshua HaMashiach. We are back. This is Community of Israel and Yisrael. I am Moreh Ebed Melech Yahshua. In the midst of our lesson on the false dilemma between and works. And we were discussing in part one work, and we only began to get into the lesson toward the end there. But does not equivocate between his requirements for to his law and added from those who serve him. He expects for his creation as created in the capacity of which he created them. He expects men to, women to, he expects children to be children, and for all of the great and capacity of which he created them. And he expects them to do it with gladness, to trust in his word and continue in his word. Counterintuitive is because our thoughts are not his thoughts, our ways are not over which we were given dominion, right? So he is his, and we have to understand that and keep that in mind. That's, but a lot of us don't like to think of ourselves in that way. I'm a man, I'm a woman, and this is where you have to start to separate yourself from your ego. All right. So we went over a few to show that the Father has a law that started from the beginning. To preface the lesson about the pseudo conflict, faith and works, and then we Leviticus 11 to go over for demonstrative purposes the requirements in the law or illustrative purposes, I should say, diet. That there is almost always a do showed us in what he wants us to eat, that to have one or the other be split, not chew the cud, or to chew the cud and not be split of hoof, or to have scales and not into the body. I want you to understand the wording that I'm choosing. Not acceptable to be one or the other. Okay? So he wants you to, right? If you are of this, meaning if you are of the circumcision, according to that covenant. If you are Israel, you are required to continue according and under that covenant. This is the emissaries, the apostles, the included for the Gentile. All those to know that covenant that Yah gave Noah. We also went over Noah and why fit a dual criterion. He was both just. A lot of people miss that second part because they still assume that they're speaking about right DNA. So do not let anybody tell you that to keep the law seed as a DNA Israelite is carnal. It's not. And the Father has an order. But what is not carnal is, and that's what we're doing when we keep his law. Set. Right? But it can't be one or the other. You can't just tell the Father, I believe, and you ain't doing nothing he told you to do because you think you're above it. That you don't have to keep the law. Get back in order. Get back in line. Right? Showing anybody who breaks any of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so. That's Matthew chapter 5, beginning at verse 17, going down to 22. He never told us to shirk our responsibilities in the law. But what he came and what Shaul reiterated was he came to a religious Israel. At that history, this was Israel's most religious in terms of their zeal for the law. But they were still. So at that time, in that hour, what he was dealing with people, right, to lord themselves over others, the priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, like a superstition. It became a burden. They was using the kids in this milk. So had a very specific ongoing must be aware of in the letters of Paul. Besides the fact that they were bringing in Gentiles into the faith of salvation. Right? And so there was the question that Israel citizens in order to be members of the body of faith. Discussion was about. Shaul in Romans chapter 4 was explaining that, listen, to do the signs of the covenant that we were given. We were given the signs of the covenant. Why he was chosen for the covenant that he received. Abram was all something about them. Use the analogy of someone choosing a wife or a husband. Something that made you say, that's a good man, that's a good woman. Right? And then you put the ring on the finger. So then the woman, they were good before you put the ring on the finger. That's why you put the ring on the finger. You cannot simply go and come as you please. You were not under that covenant. Once you have been brought under that covenant, it is to us part. It is with repentance, as Shaul points out. In the same, was not telling anyone under the covenant of to obey the covenant, because the gifts and they are without repentance. They can't be taken back. Ain't no going back. And rhetorical speech, when somebody is saying something, sometimes that is carried just way too far outside of context, and we in scriptures to our own destruction. All right. Off was understanding that gift and that calling, ring, so to speak, on the finger that was given to us after being chosen. He was given a covenant, and in Genesis chapter 17. Actually, we read it. I'm just going to read Bereshit, Genesis 17, chapter verse 11, sign of the covenant between me and you. That's a sign. So the testimony, is it faith or works? Saw that physical circumcision we just read. You shall be circumcised. Exodus chapter 12. That the spiritual side of the law is something new. No, that was just the focus of the lessons of the day, of that day, that they were very religious and they were so focused. There was, see them. We praised the Father with our lips, but we didn't do nothing he told us to do. And that called upon him. We brought offerings and, said all these elaborate. We continually wanted to bring in some ideologies of peoples, just like we see today. And I hate to say it, but especially among the sisters who want to bring in crystals, magnets, and everything else, and try to use the scriptures to justify it. That's not really. You're trying to make everything happen by every other means than what the Father gave us. Prayer, fasting, patience, obedience. Your way, salvation. It's not gonna work. Leave them crystals alone. A priest, you're not even a priest, let alone a high priest. And even if that's what you was on, it don't believe. I just got to tell you that they had wives. Why wasn't none of their wives high priests? It's a purpose. Every creation on the planet. It's not down-putting. It's not to be prophetesses. Women can be judges. Women can hold women to slavery. You have to be male to hold. There's some offices you have to be Levite to hold. Be from the family of Aharon to hold, from the family of Dawid to hold, because you feel you qualified. That's not how this works. Not resume. The Father has a plan and a purpose, positions in Israel that is according to merit, like judges. So that's why a woman can be a judge, because that is to merit. The law gives us the criterion for that. You have to, so on. And a woman can be that. She can prophesy. You see, there's nothing that says that you can't be a or some other high office in the kingdom unless you're a man. You can be a deaconess, but see, you have the same problem that a lot of men are having. You not satisfied with your space. Why should I be limited? Because your creator said so. This is what you're for. Certain things are above our pay grade as men. You got men want to be gods. Women want to be men. Children want to be grown. This is where everything went awry. Okay. So, back, so we established that the law told us be circumcised in the flesh, right? So we talking about flesh versus works, false dilemma, law versus testimony. But the same law that told us to be circumcised. So let's look at Shemot, Exodus, Shemot, chapter 12. But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcision, it's reestablishing the same circumcision that continued that, because he said what? For thee and thy seed in perpetual talk forever. As long as your seeds is having seed. Leviticus chapter 12. We're going to try to move this along. Let's look at it. It says, speak to Israel, saying, if a woman have conceived seed, born a baby, then she shall be unclean 7 days, according to the days of the separation of her infirmity. Foreskin shall be circumcised. Okay, same law. Now watch this. Deuteronomy. We see that Abraham, because of his faith, was chosen for the sign of this covenant, which was physical circumcision, right? But now, chapter 10. Let's look at verse 12. Israel, what doth Yahweh Eloheka require of thee? But fear Yahweh Eloheka, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, serve him, to serve Yahweh Eloheka with all thy heart and with all thy soul. So right now, we're going a little deeper. that they were to circumcise as long as they continue to make babies. Other here in the the so-called Old Testament, has already revealed that it's not just about the act of circumcision. The physical act. But there's something happen in your heart, in your mind. This is Old Testament. St. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Said, walk in his ways to love him and to serve Yahweh and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy lion. The heaven and the heaven of heavens is Yahweh's. The earth also, and with all that therein is. Already his, nothing give him. That ain't already his. So he's already explaining this in the Old Testament. This was lost somewhere between Saul's day. The Messiah and the Shliachim was in there. And they understood perfectly what disciples were getting at. Because they knew this. They were hypocrites. They didn't understand where they were coming from. Because they hadn't been teaching to they wanted the people to be in lockstep in order to maintain their hegemony over the people, their rule among the people of the righteous. Like the Red Sea, you go to the front of the line at the market. This is what they was on. Loving to hear themselves speak. But the weightier matters in the law is what you hold them of. It was already there. He was just being a teacher. He wasn't teaching nothing new, nothing that wasn't outside of. You can't really teach faith. You can only show somebody faith. The earth also, Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 10. In thy fathers to love them. You see where the focus is now. What part of the body is? What part of the brain is love? What size do love put on? Do it come in triple X, 12 and a half? The law with physical acts mandates that you ought to have as at the core of that mindset, whether you like it or not. I know it's supposed to be hard. I know you got your in, you got your daggers on your t-shirt. The public of your mindset is mandated that you be driven by love. This is also what was asked. What is the greatest law? What did he say? He gave us two. What's the first word in both of those laws? Come on, somebody. I heard somebody say something. Love. Right? Your heart is your core, the center around which everything else. That's what heart means. So, do you have love at your core? You out there teaching, you out there preaching, love for Elohim, love for your people, love for your fellow man, love for your, and you want to project great, that you better than everybody, that you fit to be a judge. Or is it love at the core of your teaching? Man, that's soft, man. And about softness and hardness in the eyes of the Father. Watch this. Elohim with all thy heart and all thy soul. Verse 13. To keep of Yahweh and his statutes, which I command you this day. I'm sorry, we was at 15. In thy fathers to love them. That's even you above all people as this day. We love to say, man, we Israel only. But he just told you why. It ain't because you better than nobody, Israel. That's just you doing your job. Preacher, you're just a human being like everybody else. Because he delighted in your fathers to love them and special. I know that hurts some of us, but when you understand that, then you understand that it's because even though Noah was said to be upright and pure in all his ways, so and that's the spiritual. Upright being the spiritual, it says that Father had what on him? Grace. Because it's not enough. See, this is showing you how what you are to the. You could be perfect and the Father still not choose you. He could have just threw Noah away with everybody else and started over. Just decided not even to do this no more. You know what? I don't even want to do this. I'm just going to throw it all away. And I'm going to exist as I did. Let there be light. Kill it all. Or do something. Because it's his sketch. He can shape up. That's something hard for us to accept because that makes us suck. And arrogance won't let you do that. is mentioning how, an employer can fire you. That uncertainty is hard to live with for a lot of people. It causes a lot of people right to work states. I don't even have to give a reason. Up here, they can fire you at any time, but they have to explain their employment. Then that's what they got to do to explain it. But they don't have to. They don't have to. Not fire unless you got a union job. Having that kind of authority over us, and that's a problem. So I understand that when it comes to man, that's probably got a problem with the Most High, somebody who you acknowledge as your creator, because say something about what's going on in your heart, where your mind is at, and understand what you are. He is he's far above us as we are over our pet dogs. Just accepting. I put my cat out when I eat. Him, not that he's doing anything wrong. I just don't like him around. You tell him to sit in a certain spot and stay. I like hands on while I'm eating. That's just me exercising my dominion. Or so on. This is the type of understanding that we have to have about ourselves when it comes to the Father, and how you just a little bit of you just the high liaison between him and the rest of creation under you. That's it. You the gardener, the storekeeper. You the manager. Man was you, not the store owner. You the shopkeeper. I know that's a hard saying for some of you righteous folk. This is the part that they were missing in Yehoshua's day. The Pharisees and the Sadducees. And this is that was the focus. It's not because it was anything new. Okay? So this dilemma between faith and works and the heart and the flesh is false. It was always all above. Just like scales on fish, just like split of the hoof and chewing water to be considered a clean animal, it was always a dual criterion. It's no different with us, right? So he said, only Yahweh, we in Devarim, chapter 10, verse thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after circumcised, therefore, the foreskin of your heart, of your consciousness, and be no what more what. All this being hard, you almost got to say no homo or pause every time you say the word love.
Okay. Yep.
All that's going right like that you constantly talking about. You, them, and your hard heart. See, one of the analogy to circumcision, why that's being used, is because one of the things that happens when you don't circumcise is that skin around your the glands of your penis will sometimes it'll chafe and it hardens. I know somebody right now, a family member of mine's husband had to get his whole cut off recently. I'm talking about like within a month or two of now today that I'm speaking is the Gentiles, July the 30th. Within a couple of months ago, he had to get his entire, and they couldn't just circumcise him. It was pretty much no saving his tip. If they didn't cut it off, it was gonna spread all the whole tip of the joint. This individual is probably in his 50s. It had gotten so calloused that this individual, in probably decades, moisturized so you can clean it, because just like what's behind your ear or what happens under your arms or in any of the crevices of your bacteria. And if you under the hood, as they say, that's the imagine deck down up in your joint, but you can't. It's so nasty. It's not elastic no more, where you can't stretch it and pull it back. Those raised by their mama, because their mamas don't know, and nobody has that conversation with them. So they don't even know. They have to chop his whole head off the skin. So this is what that represents: the hardening of the heart. Who prides yourself in being hard against the Father's values, what he says, therefore, foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. You think you the muscles in your neck, and you hardening your neck and center. Can't nobody tell you nothing. Can't nobody say nothing to you. Nothing gets through, in or out, because you, pun intended. Nobody even have a conversation with you. You tough meat, you mutton. The of a year old. After a year, a sheep is mutton. You ever tasted mutton? And it's tough. We talked about the law being the schoolmaster. What is it teaching you? Or you just checking boxes? If it ain't teaching you nothing, you almost might as well not even be keeping it. I'm not telling you not to. Doing something is better than doing nothing. The law with the testimony. If you ain't, it'll be of some benefit, because, like we always say here, you do the right things for the wrong reasons, and it will be of some benefit, limited, but some. But you will not what it is you seek. You will fall of the glory. But regardless of, it's only by grace that we live. Okay, So here we have in the law, we see something of being circumcised, open heart surgery. No, you're not talking about opening up your head and circumcising your brain. Your mind is not a physical function of the brain, but it's not a physical. So obviously, this is something spiritual that he's speaking of. And Deuteronomy chapter 30. Let's jump right to verse 6. We're going to hit it and quit it. Look at it says, Yahweh Elohecha will circumcise thy love. Yahweh Elohecha with all. That is our pledge of allegiance to love Yahweh with all of our heart, all of our soul. But the Father has not something a man do. That's something you have to allow happen. And for a lot of men, brothers, especially those who grew up in my generation, let your heart be circumcised, sometimes harder than letting somebody come with a some we have more resistance circumcised than being circumcised in the flesh because it's painful and it's scary. And when you get circumcised of the heart, your heart is exposed now. You That's hard for a man to do and a woman. I'm saying humans, because we think we need that protective layer come in. We think if we nice to people, taken advantage of. We think love makes us weak. Advantage. They think they winning when they take advantage of somebody's love. They but we know what happens to things, right? So just like the Father required scales and fins, just like the Father required the land animals to be split of the hoof and chew the cud, he required and perfect in his generations. Guess what? He requires flesh and in the heart. There was never any dilemma. It's a dilemma. There is no argument as to which is more important. You still don't believe me. Okay. Let's look at the book of Hebrews. Turn with me to the Hebrews. I actually, because my eyes is getting. Letter to the Hebrews, chapter 4. We getting dilemma. Look at chapter 4. Right? He says, for the work of Elohim is quick and powerful and to even to the dividing asunder of the soul, nostrils of Adam, and he became a living soul, and you that he looks at the two things going together, they're married together, right? Because but he can judge us according separately with his word, right? We can't separate, but the Father can look on each separately. Both a just man, spirit, and pure in his generations. That division. Nobody else on the planet, presumably, that corrupt in spirit or corrupt in soul or both. Well, I don't know what your physical lineage is, and I don't think it depends on the station. He says, and of the joints and the marrow. So what am I? I'm talking about the duality, the dual criterion. Here, the joints and the two-edged sword. There's a dual criterion. Watch this. And discerner of the thoughts and intents of about the men who the men. He said every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Earth at that time. So Hebrews is the referencing that the Father is able to discern the thoughts. We just read in Deuteronomy that we will be to be circumcised of the flesh. Now we understand to be circumcised in the heart. One thing is a representation of the other. But does that mean that decision of the heart we can abandon the commandment to circumcise? Show a hardening of the heart, though. This is how you have. But for those who think that you have grown beyond the physical circumcision among Christians, is that once you've been circumcised, you need to be circumcised of the flesh. No, he was just saying that about those who, to make the point that they can be righteous, that they can be just without. But they had begun to think, according that they were that they could usurp Israel, are allowed place in the kingdom, but not Israel's place. And that's what the in Romans chapter 11 was about. To let them know that just because Israel is down right now doesn't mean that you're going to take their place in their place and you fall in your place. Have you fooled? This is what he said to them in so many words. He was talking to the white folk in the congregation. And because they began already before the apostles died, they had all, aka replacement theology, where the church is now Christian church. That had already begun while they were still alive on earth. It didn't. It didn't take long. They had already begun themselves up because of the care, defense that Paul put up for them. Started letting that go to his head. So watch this. This well, go to Jeremiah chapter 9. Either or ministry. This is a both. This is a all of the above. Jeremiah chapter 9. This is the same author from the of the new covenant. Watch what he says. Jeremiah chapter 9. Verse 25. Behold, the day is come, circumcised. Egypt, Judah, Edom, and Moab, and all that are in the utmost corner that dwell in the wilderness, for all these nations, all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in heart. So he just told you, right, that, and this is where Paul was coming from. That listen, it don't matter if you of the circumcision or you uncircumcised in heart, you gonna go down, you gonna find yourself in the same place. You're gonna lift up your eyes in the lake of fire right along with them. Judah, Edom, and the of Ammon and Moab. Presumably, Edom, Ammon, and Moab are supposed to be circumcised. Depending on Moab and Ammon, depending on if you consider Lot's children, are supposed to be of the circumcision. But it says, and the, so you're going to go down with Judah, Edom, and Ammon, and Moab, just like everybody else. Is not going to save you from Yah's judgment. This is the whole point that Paul was making concerning. It was already in Jeremiah. This is why we have to understand of what we're reading. It had nothing to do with telling Israel you don't have to be, that they can in Israel's place without being circumcised. Paul told Gentile, if you are Israel, do not remove the mark of your circumcision. Mark means is the same token, meaning a. Matter of fact, let me cue First Corinthians 7. We'll go there a little later. All right.
Yeah.
Slick. So, getting back to Ezekiel 44. This is what's going to kill the supersessionists. Let's jump down to matter of fact, you know what? Let's start at verse 1. Ezekiel chapter verse 1. He says, Then he brought me back the way outward sanctuary, which looketh toward the east, and it was shut. Then said he, open, and no man shall enter in by it, because it shall be shut. So, I had a conversation with the body of Hamashiach. There are places in chambers that if you go into a building and there are certain areas that's restricted, employees on uh, no boots beyond this point, so on and so forth. There are places, and some people have a problem with that. They have a problem with the fact that in the temple, and they don't understand that there's areas in the body that can only be occupied by certain ones. And they take Paul's words out of context when he says there is no Jew body of Hamashiach. He's just talking about to gain entry into the body in general. That everybody's welcome in the body. That means but your station where your function has some requirements, and we're about to read that now. He brought me back the way of the gate of the outward sanctuary that is never existed. So even reading it today, we're reading about it. Some say it represents the body of Christ, perhaps. But even if I surprise you, right? He says, he brought me back to the way of the gate. The outward sanctuary was shut. He said to me, this gate shall be shut, it shall not be open, and no man shall enter it in it, for it shall be shut. So already we found a restricted area. The prince, he shall sit in it to eat bread by the way of the same. So only one individual can. Some people have the problem with that. Why do that gate? Watch this. He says, then he brought me by the way of the north gate before that. We still talking about the dual criterion. Circumcision of the heart, circumcision of the flesh. We're talking about the dual criterion of the Father. Not a dilemma between faith and works, circumcision of the flesh and circumcision of the heart, between obedience and sacrifice. 5, we in Ezekiel, Yehezkel, chapter 44, verse 5. And Yahweh, the Son of Man, art well and behold with thine eyes. All right, so write this down and take a good look and hear with your ears. Listen good. All that I say, ordinances of the house of Yahweh, and all the what? Laws thereof. This is a few. If the laws was nailed to the cross, what is this? What are these laws he's talking about? What is this sanctuary he's talking about? This house. He says, hear thy words. Now, even if this is talking about maybe a future physical temple, or if it's talking about rhetorically, right? Listen to what he's saying. He's saying that it has ordinances, right? Figuratively speaking, the body of Hamashiach. He says, and mark well the entering of the entering in of the house forth of the sanctuary. Right? So there's still chambers, even if that are restricted according to the gifts and the calling. Watch this. Gifts and calling are spiritual. Anybody can get the gifts now. Anybody reading holds true throughout this prophecy, this analogy. If verse 6, we in Hezkel, chapter 40, thou shalt say to rebellious, even to the house of Israel, right? Because at this time, Israel was in rebellion, disobedient. He said, thus saith Adonai Yahweh. He's talking to, at this time, is Israel. What have they done? Now, watch this. He says, O ye house of Israel, let it suffice you. In that, verse 7, ye have brought into my strangers. What kind of strangers, y'all? Uncircumcised in heart, uncircumcised in flesh. Well, wait a minute. If the sanctuary, if this is a future temple, or if this is representative of what, then is the problem of being uncircumcised in flesh? Now, I want you to understand before we go any further. If, matter of fact, listen, because I don't want you to think that I'm saying, right, cannot the temple or cannot be entered, uncircumcised Gentile. Go back one chapter. Hang on one second. Excuse me one second. It's actually in chapter 10. Actually, I was gonna go. Okay, so stay where you at. We one chapter earlier. We in Ezekiel chapter 43, right? 43:5. Look at this right quick. Just look at 43:5. Says the Spirit took me up. Chapter 44. We're talking about the. Says the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner court. You go to Ezekiel. I'm jumping around a little bit because right because we're talking about where you are. Okay, Ezekiel 10:5. It says, and the sound heard even to the court as the voice of the Almighty Elohim speaketh. Because I want you to get an idea of how the temple is set up, right? We 44, the chapter that we're in, he's speaking of the sanctuary. In he speaks of the court. In Ezekiel 10, he speaks of the outer court. So what are we talking about? Chambers, the 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 body of Messiah is set up like the temple, where there are chambers. There's an outer court, there's a sanctuary, and there's a sanctuary of sanctuaries. There are certain requirements to get in. Why do I say that? Turn to Revelations 11. Beginning at verse, it says, and there was given me a reed, and the angel and said, saying, rise, measure the temple of Elohim. We are in Revelation, and we still talking about temples. When we're talking about the law has been done away with and there's no more temple. Speaking of the body of Hamashiach, it's still, if the law is the schoolmaster, it must be something about how the body of Hamashiach is set up, isn't it? Because if one is analogous to the other, then doesn't it? Otherwise, it's incongruent. Right? So he says, there was into a rod, a stick, and the Melech said, the Melech measured the temple of King and the altar and them that worship therein. Them worship therein. right? Verse 2, the which is without the temple, the court, the that we just in Ezekiel's temple. It says, leave that out, including it from being a part of the temple. They're measuring this part. Okay? Given unto the city, they shall tread the foot for 42 months. So, this is talking about something that's going on during uh, the tribulation. They allowed beyond the outer courts. Why are they allowed to tread? Because the Father is protective of anything beyond that outer court. In some, because it was simply outside that surrounded the inner court that was basically open to the public. And in some, by some accounts, the court of women was actually the inner court, but Israelite women only. And then the sanctuary was for men. But that's extra biblical. Let's keep. So, uh, let's go back to Ezekiel. Understand it. That what we are talking about here is a particular of the body that there is a certain requirement. It was required that the land animals be split. We eat have scales and fins, not scales or fins. Body who steps into the sanctuary say that it's all spiritual. He tells you by way of his prophet Yehezkel that Israel sinned, strangers, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary. Even my house, when ye offer my bread, the fat and the blood. Hey, this is what they had done by this time. We in Yehezkel, Ezekiel chapter. He said, ye have flesh to be in my sanctuary, to pollute it, even my house, the fat and blood, and they have broken my covenant because of all your abomination. Temple, which some of you Christians say represents the body of Christ. Which may or may not be accurate, but I can see it, relatively speaking. But I do believe that this is a future temple, as implied by Revelations 11. But as you can see, there is still that dual requirement. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, to be circumcised both in the flesh, to take to occupy this particular space in the temple and or. Now, are you humble enough to accept that? He said they have broken my covenant. What covenant? A temple or some representation of the temple post Yehoshua's. So what is he talking about? Certainly the new covenant, according to Christian. So circumcision of the flesh being important because somebody lied. Watch this, verse 8. And ye have not kept the charge of mine for yourselves. They done hired heathens. This is what they done. This is what got us. Verse 9. Thus said no stranger, foreigner, circumcised in flesh, either or. It says that means if he missing either one of these, one is spiritual, the other one got to be physical. They can't both be spiritual. He's being very explicit here. Where's the confusion? No, this is a future. Ezekiel's temple has never been built. He says, no stranger uncircumcised in heart, nor uncircumcised in the flesh shall enter into my of any strangers among the children of Israel. So that means that you can be what? Among us. This is not to exclude stranger. The stranger, if they are uncircumcised in, but they can't sit into the sanctuary except and unless they are circumcised both in heart and in the flesh. And none into the sanctuary of sanctuaries. Only one can do that. Right? So he says, verse 10, and the Levites that are gone away far from me, they had back. Israel went astray, which went astray away from me. Who are we talking about? Yet they shall be ministers, servants, sanctuary, having charge at the gates of the house. So guess what? Nothing has changed. And ministering to the house, and they shall slay the burnt sacrifice, and they shall stand for them to minister unto them. So you mean to tell me reinstitution of sacrifice? The king returns and set his feet upon the Mount of Olives, and it split the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Jordan River. That people are going to the boost. Am I right, Moray? Let me know.
Feel
That means it's got to be a temple.
all the time. You won't have to miss like
And everything at that point will be expanded. Everything will be sold up. What do I mean? So what was once just outer court, inner court, it will now be all of Jerusalem will be the sanctuary. Every pot and pan in Jerusalem gonna be holy because it's gonna be the whole world crisis. That's prophecy. See, this is the part where people just they can't just put themselves in a place where they don't. It no longer out of world fans fancy. Don't come up with those offerings at Sukkot. No rain for you. Patience. And that right, Moray?
absolutely. Fulfill those that wasn't fulfilled. I mean, we have to fulfill the spoken, and this machine that had before because we have failed in the past. And under Yahushua's watch,
And and the point of the lesson, the Father has not abandoned his criterion. In the Father's word, if he say be circumcised of the flesh, he means for you to. He says be circumcised for the heart. He means for you to be circumcised for the heart. One is not in competition with the other. We read Psalm. We opened up with Psalm 19. I just want to touch back on that, but we're just gonna read verse 7. It says, "Is converting the soul." He said the law converts the soul. This is Dawid. Well, we've been told the law don't save you. It don't change you. It do it. It's perfect if you submit to it and you convert the soul. The heart, though, is something you're doing on the outside. Internalize the. It will convert your soul. But watch this. Testimony of Yah is sure. So here we have it. The law and the testament. It's not one or the other. It's not either or. This is not split of hoof, chew the cud, scale, law, testimony. I want it all. So the law is perfect, converting the soul, and the testimony is sure, making the wise. You see that? The law, the testimony, the statutes, the fear of Elohim, the judgments. They two sides of the same coin. Ain't no separating the two. Ain't no one or the other. Ain't no one above. Yehoshua said, when you teach men to not to do even the least of, that does not relieve you of obedience, the least of the law. Because the type of humility that you have, but people who reach some level of righteousness and that they're far, keep the Sabbath, carnal things. Okay, you above it, huh? Okay, we gonna see. Mr. High and Mighty, same thing to those who think you righteous, you just. You check boxes on the law side. There was a rabbi named Hillel who wrote law to the letter, and I'm paraphrasing, and still be a scoundrel. Possible. And this is what Shaul and Yehoshua came to teach. You can check all of those boxes and circumcised in the heart. You will be keeping all of those laws and just be a scoundrel. I wish I could find that quote. I'll find it one day. And what Yehoshua taught. But you can keep the letter and still be a scoundrel because you're not. It's you and you think that's making you righteous, and you just a burden to everybody in your life. Not why you think it's not the devil, it's you, because you have not a whole nother lesson. That's something that's hard to teach. Turn to Psalm 78. We almost finished. Talking about the dual nature of Yah's, that is something both in the physical and in the spirit. You can't just walk, but I'm a good person. Now you feel like, and uh, you know what the values is supposed to be, not a good person. And even if you doing everything right, giving charity, not love. And that's the perfect example of doing a righteous work, but not having it in your heart. Rejected, just like Cain's offering. Because you're doing it for the appearance of righteousness. Really can't, you don't care about these people. You're doing, that's how you can keep the law and still be a scoundrel who record them giving somebody some shoes and then look up at the camera. That like is your reward. This is what that's talking about. Some of you out there doing the work. I've been around you brothers that's out there doing work. Know, trust, and believe that sending any of those brothers that's out there doing the work. But I'm addressing those who doing the work of them to glory of in themselves. They like to appear important. They feel like it raises their value of your work. It's in vain. Work for the wrong reasons, it still benefits those who hear the gospel, the good. That's one. We in Psalms, Tehillah, 28, just about done. I got two more after this. He says, for he established a test in the covenant. The testimony in Yaakov and appointed a law in Israel, which he commended our last. Let's go to 8. Isaiah chapter 8, verse 16. Testimony, seal the law upon among my disciples, my Talmud, that hideth his face from the house of Yaakov, and I will look for all of the testimony. Bind up the testimony, seal up the law. Bind up the covenant, seal up the law. The dual nature of righteousness. Right? He says, be whom Yahweh given me are for a sign or for signs and wonders, which dwelleth in Harzion. Verse 19. And when the wizards that peep and that mutter, hubba bubba bubba bubba, witchcraft that sneaks into the body of Hamashiach. You want crystals, speaking in tongues that nobody can interpret, fake interpreters. About you. Says, should not a people seek unto their Elohim for the living to the dead, to the law and to the testimony. The law and speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. So if they not talking, if you not, it's like you supposed to eat those things that end fins, just like you supposed to be something you entertain as a teacher. They need to be speaking according to the law and the testimony of Yahshua. If they speaking not according to this, and darkness is in them, and they shall pass through it hardly, and it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves and curse their king, and behold, trouble and darkness, dimness and anguish, and they shall speaking according to the law and the testimony. Ain't no light in them. I don't care how enlightened they sound. They sound. They have no light in them if they're not speaking criterion. He gave a covenant. He gave Noah a covenant prior to giving them the law. It's the bond. And the sign of that covenant for Noah was the rainbow. And then he gave him the law. Don't eat blood. So on and so forth. He gave Abraham the covenant. The sign of that covenant, circumcision. He gave Israel, same thing passed to Israel, he gave them the law. That's your criterion. The law and the testimony. Revelation. Just to show you, you who believe that we spend too much time in, let's go to the future. Let's go back to the future. Watch now. Verse 7, Revelations, all the rest, says there was a war in Hashmayim, a war in heaven, and his Melechim, and prevailed not, neither was there, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his Melechim in Hashmayim. Now is come the salvation and strength. The kingdom for the accuser of the brethren has been cast down. The accuser, that is your adversary, the devil, in a court. The person who is accusing you, he's saying that he has been cast down. That gate, that one gate, the outwards, on the east of the sanctuary, was through that gate. So only the prince can go through that gate. Do you see that? Is the only one who can go through that gate. So that's telling you something. That we're talking about a spiritual authority and a physical authority passing through that gate. So look at verse. It says, now is come the salvation and the kingdom of Eloheinu. Do you see how that coincides? For the king before Eloheinu day and night. And they overcame him by him and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives unto death. Well in them, Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, of the seal of the devil, for the seal that he hath but a short time. The devil know he ain't got much time. So he attacking the saints. Big time. Verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto earth, he persecuted the woman before the man child. The man child early in this chapter is the Hamashiach, who was brought forth by the woman, which is Israel, not the church. We established that with Romans chapter 11. Verse 14. Revelation chapter 12. And the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her time, for the face from the face of the serpent. This is the same period Israel, or the same time. This is the same amount of time that Israel of the uncircumcised of the flesh to trample. I'm confusing 2 different things. This was the same. This is the same time that the Gentiles are going to be in the outer court. This is that same period of time. All right. Verse 15. Cast out his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause, which is Israel, that he might cause her to carry the flood. The flood, brothers and sisters, if you jump ahead to the next is armies. Armies of men coming after Israel. Well, watch this. It says, Israel, the earth, has swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. This is being the nation that for 42 months. A year and a half a year. Finally, they're going to chase us up out of here. And it says, verse 17, the dragon brought the woman and went to make war on the remnant of her seed. Answer, which keep the have the testimony, law, testimony, scales, blood, flesh. There is no discrepancy. There is no dilemma. Criterion. Law, belief. It's not one or the other. So I hope I made that clear. Fallacy of a debate outside of the misunderstanding which had to be corrected by anyone misunderstood. I guess we'll end with that. I will end with that scripture found in James chapter 2. Starting at verse 14. What doth it they may say he had faith and hath not works? Can faith save him? And one of you say unto me, right? You speak in life. notwithstanding profit. See, that's these faithful folk thinking that foolishness. He says, and one of you and being alone. So it's not one or the other. God has faith and I have works. Show me by my works. Because what I do show you what I believe. Anything. The devil. Why? Because he know y'all. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works, this is the elder correcting a younger teacher, can send people off. He said, was not Abraham our father? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? Meaning, Abraham didn't just believe, he obeyed. His obedience showed his faith, demonstrated, illustrated his faith. His faith was put to work when he did what he was. He didn't say, "Well, I believe you. I'm not finna go up there, go up that mountain, but I believe you." What do you think the response would have been? Keep it in my heart. Yeah, that's a real doctrine. I wear the fringes on my heart. It's in my heart. Watch this. Verse 23. And the scripture was filled with which said, Abraham believed Elohim and was impute, and it was in the fear of Elohim. So Shaul was right when he said that his faith was counted, but his faith was demonstrated by his obedience. That showed how much faith he had. Final verse, ye see then, and not by faith only. The harlot justified by works when she had received the messengers and sent them, for as the body without spirit is dead, so is faith. So your time, your talents, your trust, you got to get big. You got to keep this low as it applies. So that's it for the lesson on today. More additions, or if you want to take questions, I relinquish the microphone.
Hey, I thought I just, wanted to, outside of saying, give praise to the Father, because, I believe if I would have talked, I would have touched on some of the same angle in the direction that, he wanted us to go in and deal with the completeness of his word, of his direction, that he's pointing his people in, right now in this hour, especially those in this country. And we touched on some of the same things, in the past few weeks.
Maury, if you could speak a little closer to the mic. Can that's
how do I sound now?
A little better.
Yeah, I had to turn the volume up. These two sides of the same coin. If the law, if Yehoshua would be 100-pound barbell, and just unevenly yoked, you know what I mean? And he kept showing the whole dynamic how the Father works. Chewing his cud, and on one side, of the application of the faith on the other side. Like how you brought that out and it's confirmed in the Father's word because it's to be attacked. The law is done away with and showing one side and even a lot of Shaul's teachings and James had to come behind him and show the other without fully explaining that faith is not the extent of Gentile salvation. Salvation. And like you say, when you leave so much room for self, you create doctrines, and people go on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good that what makes a modern day prophet is one who can go in the word and explain it. Because he said, prophets are unto John, like far as on the world stage, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But a prophet can go and interpret the predictions and what the Father's saying. You know how you can bring out an understanding of what the law and testimony, because you can see that pattern throughout the entire scriptures.
Okay.
The law and the testimony, the stickhood, you could, they always come in duels, tandems, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So you brought that out,
Yeah. Hallelujah. And that Shaul was speaking to a very particular audience. It was about, he was talking to very religious, or he was talking about very religious folk, uh, doing the works in the law. That their problem was that vision of the heart, and so he was right. But if we don't, if he needed to address as his station, you know, because like you said, if he hadn't, that's even K5, even in second Peter, they said, listen, he was a rhetorical orator, and you can twist it to your own destruction as you do the other scriptures. So it's or the newest, I should say, of all the apostles. Sometimes he needed to be corrected too. Sometimes all we see is Paul, all of the other sides of his art of the conversation. But we that there was these were men. They wasn't for public. Right. It was in-house stuff. This was in-house stuff.
That's where your heart is headed. But
Right.
win with faith and action. Kneel, and this is good to chew on and dialogue about.
One other analogy, that I think everybody can identify to uh the keeping the physical law and committing the right, and how important it is to do both. Um, and those, I'm gonna say and put it like that to be nice to myself, and that means I'm fat. I'm fat. uh, but in my struggle with weight, there are times where I'm actually good in terms of, you know, the regiment that I'm supposed to be on, but I'm not as active as I should be. And there are times hitting them, you know, the calisthenics, and you know, I'm snacking all the time on the wrong things. Uh, Gives me the results that I'm looking for, except and unless it's only I got my diet under control and I'm consistent, you know, like my exercise regimen is when you will see I will see the greatest and effectiveness of those two things. If I'm doing one or the other, won't go down. I want you, you know what I'm saying? I'll stay. So if I'm gonna stay, I just won't get worse. You see what I'm saying? But it's not until I'm doing both, bringing it together, that I actually start getting some gains. You see what I'm saying? And understanding circumcised in the heart and being circumcised in the flesh, being internalizing the law and applying the law spiritually. It's love and obedience. The law and with that, praise you. And Moray, if you want to choose somebody to, unless there's any questions, if you want to help.
Yeah, real quick, we got another pleasant surprise. Y'all say the same for next Shabbat. We will be out on remote at 11 a.m. all the way up until 4 p.m. Same. Have another pleasant surprise. Great, great. So look alive. They make preparations to get out to the South Shore Library change over the southeast side, 11 a.m. So come on out to the South Shore Library, 73rd Street, and exchange. Is a street where the railroad track, the train, the metro train, he will be on the side, away from the lake. That's the west
Okay.
side of the street. Next Shabbat, August 6th at 11 a.m. All right. So, Elder Yaakov, were you going to lead us out in prayer?
Okay.
Let us go come before him and